I'm Manny, and way back when I used to work with Chuck, who's in the crowd there. Chuck, if you could raise your hand there. Chuck is the former head of security for the U.S. Postal Service, if you didn't know that. And back then, I think there were simpler times. Not a lot of folks had adopted cloud at that point. But in the past, 10 years, we've seen a proliferation of cloud, not just software as a service, but also infrastructure as a service. And this is, cloud security posture management is primarily focused on infrastructure as a service. There are solutions that are emerging that are focused more so on software as a service, posture management, but we're not really going to get into that. We're really focused on cloud security posture management, cloud security posture assessments. I just want to demystify it for you. If you haven't seen, how a cloud security posture assessment is done, um, the mechanics, then this will certainly help you, figure out how to do it within your own organization, and also help you figure out how to select the right solution for your organization. I personally think that cloud security posture management and cloud security posture assessment have reached the point where they're table stakes. There are a lot of security safeguards and aspects that I think are table stakes these days, like multi-factor authentication. And I think cloud security posture management has reached that point as well. In fact, it's always a good idea if you are performing some sort of pen test against your cloud hosted, workload, whether it's an application or an internal app, that you do supplement it with a cloud security posture assessment, and even go so far as to share those results with the folks that are doing the pen testing. Just gives them a little bit more information that they otherwise would find over time, but just expedites the process. I'm a big fan of removing unnecessary obstacles to ensure greater value for the product that you're getting. I happen to use a tool called Trend Micro Conformity. There are a number of cloud security posture management solutions on the market, and you're certainly it's recommended that you evaluate these solutions to try to figure out which ones have the best coverage for your environment, which ones produce the best results. Conformity for us, which is actually the cloud security posture management solution within the Trend Micro Cloud One platform, is the solution that we use. And I'll get into a little bit about why we use it without trying to make it a sales pitch. We don't really, sell Trend Micro cloud security posture management solutions, but the reason though is that it has a pretty good knowledge base. And so if you come over here to the knowledge base, you can see that it has pretty good coverage for AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. We focus primarily on AWS, and so we typically are performing cloud security posture assessments against AWS workloads. I'm not going to take you through the integration process, but what I will do is kind of walk you through the logistics. Integrating with one account takes roughly 15 minutes start to finish. I'll start with what is a cloud security posture assessment first. It is essentially an evaluation of how your services, whether it's AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure, are configured, right? And the terminology that most folks are using is well configured. And it's evaluating the security posture on an account by account basis. You can, in certain cases, integrate with an AWS organization if you're familiar, but typically it's on an account by account basis. You have the flexibility of with some solutions, you have the flexibility of moving those licenses around. And it's really intended to get some visibility into how well configured your environment is, how well configured some of the infrastructure is. It's not going into how well configured an operating system is. I think you typically need something with a little bit more visibility, typically with an agent to view that sort of information or gather that sort of data. But it can tell you, for example, whether you have CloudTrail enabled, whether CloudTrail has a file integrity checking enabled, whether encryption is enabled for the bucket that stores your CloudTrail logs. It can tell you if you have flow logs enabled. And I actually have a mock report that I'll pull up that'll show you some of the findings that you can come up with. And then lastly, what I'll do is I'll show you how you can leverage ChatGPT, large language model, to essentially help you with some of your research, right? Do caution though that ChatGPT isn't necessarily it shouldn't necessarily be your only source. Between GCP, Amazon, and Azure, those environments are pretty well documented. One thing to note is that ChatGPT only has information up to a certain date. The last I checked, that was September 2021. And so you should check the latest information to make sure that, or the latest documentation to make sure that you have the information at your disposal to, one, refactor risk, two, really understand the impact associated with a specific misconfiguration or configuration issue. And then obviously to help you make recommendations to mitigate that risk or remediate that risk. And I tend to use mitigate and remediate a little bit differently. They mean two different things to me. Mitigate to me is reducing risk. Remediating to me is actually eliminating it. So there is a difference, I think. And then, but of course, you can leverage ChatGPT to make you much better at your job and help you improve your skills, especially when it comes to cloud security risk. So when you do integrate a cloud security posture assessment tool, management tool, you will get a good idea of how well configured it is. And it's an integration that's typically read-only through the API, the command line interface. And what you're doing is, again, evaluating all the services, how well configured they are, trying to figure out what's enabled, what isn't enabled, how well configured each of those services are. And then, of course, you can produce reports, try to figure out, for example, the extent to that the account and the workloads in the account comply with or measure up to certain standards like SOC 2, PCI, some of the NIST cybersecurity framework, the Center for Internet Security foundation benchmarks for AWS, for example, for GCP, for Azure. And so you can produce these reports, and I'll show you how to do that too within this environment. And you do want a solution that could produce both PDF reports and CSV reports. I typically don't use the PDF reports. I typically just download the CSV files and create my own and perform my own analysis of an environment. And then if you do have, at least read-only access to the environment, it's easier for you to evaluate the extent to which a security risk is actually a risk. And then it certainly helps you to refactor, gather information that'll help you refactor a risk. So you may come across some things that are reported within a cloud security posture management or assessment report or spreadsheet, CSV file that are labeled high risk, but you can use your read access to evaluate the extent to which that information is valid, evaluate the context in which the workload is hosted to figure out if there are mitigating controls, mitigating safeguards that will help you refactor that risk. Does anyone have any questions regarding what a cloud security posture assessment is? All right. So I'll move on here to conformity. And so the integration is pretty easy. I'm not going to take you through the whole process, but I'm going to add an account here in the lower left, and I'm just going to pick AWS and click next. And then I'm just going to create a test account. And with conformity, you do have to have the account that you plan to integrate open in the same browser, right? You can do it offline, but it requires you to gather some additional information like the account ID. So you can actually have somebody else run it, like your cloud ops team can run it, but you have to provide them the CloudFormation template. And then they have to actually input the account ID when they do run it. And usually it's an automated setup. Click next, and you essentially run this CloudFormation template. Let me open that up here, and we can take a look at it. There are organizations that are really adamant about not running CloudFormation. Unfortunately, that you're not going to be able to get around that unless, of course, you want to essentially convert this to Terraform and try to build that integration, manually. I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's, worth falling on that sword. You're going to have some CloudFormation templates mixed in with Terraform, even if you're, a near 100% Terraform shop. And ultimately, the vendor is keeping up with the template, right? Now, it's never a good idea to run a template without actually evaluating it, right? There are some infrastructure as code solutions that evaluate the extent to which a CloudFormation template or even a Terraform file are doing what they intend to do, right? Here, we're just going to scroll down a little bit of a way here. You can see this. It's a two-part CloudFormation template. So you have CloudFormation part 1, and then down below you have part 2. And here you have the effect, which is allow. And here are all the actions that are listed. And there's a lot of actions, right? But as you can tell, we have a lot of things called describe, list, right? Describe again, detect, get. So all of these are read-only actions in AWS, right? Always a good idea either to run it through a template scanner, try to figure out what's going on, or actually do a manual review if it's short enough to go through and just make sure that you're not unintentionally giving a third-party solution or another person more permissions than they truly need to perform the work. In this case, Cloud Security Posture Assessment Tool, Cloud Security Posture Management Tool doesn't need anything more than read-only, but read-only for just about every service that could possibly be configured within AWS. All right, when you run the stack, when you launch the stack, it's essentially going to create this CloudFormation stack here. And what you're looking for when it's done is this ARN for this cloud conformity role, right? You're going to copy that and you're going to bring it back to trend and you're going to paste it here, right? And then at that point, you'll go next, and then it will start the scanning process. It's easy as that. And it takes roughly, I don't know, 15 minutes max, right? The actual scanning, less than 10 minutes, right? All right, so let's see, where do we go from here? Let's go back to the knowledge base. So a good cloud security posture assessment tool is going to give you a lot of different information, right? I mentioned that it would let you know about CloudTrail earlier, so let's take a quick look. So here we have, a number of different CloudTrail configuration issues that we could possibly find, right? One of them is CloudTrail enabled, right? So ensure CloudTrail is enabled in all regions. And if that fires, By the way, when you produce your reports, you're producing reports. I like to just filter to fail checks only, right? And that way I know that everything that I'm dealing with is a failed check. And at that point, if something like this comes up and it says CloudTrail enabled failed, right? Which is counterintuitive. It should say CloudTrail not enabled, but it says CloudTrail enabled, and then in another column you're going to have a section attribute called failed. Then at that point you have a misconfiguration. So then what I typically do is I head over to ChatGPT. If I'm not already familiar with the misconfiguration, right? If I don't already have a clear understanding of what I'm dealing with, and I've come across some that are pretty interesting. One was a VPC endpoint that was overly that had more permissions than it needed, right? It had essentially full admin permissions, which is pretty dangerous for a VPC endpoint. So when you're working with ChatGPT, again, remember that for the most part, it's right. There have been some issues where people have made some queries and realized that it wasn't consistent with the truth. But for the most part, I found that it is very accurate when it comes to this kind of work, right? And if you have junior and even mid-level analysts who are trying to get a handle on AWS, Azure, and GCP cloud security, then something like ChatGPT could be a godsend, because even though AWS, GCP, and Azure have extensive documentation, sometimes it's not really easy to filter through the noise to get at the essence of the issue, right? Now while it's a great place to start, I don't think it's a great place to finish. I still think the documentation is where you finish, right? The ChatGPT can just get you in the ballpark. It sounds like the truth, but you always want to confirm within the documentation or within recent blog posts or within recent YouTube videos that are fairly recent, whether that's the truth or not. So I usually start by asking ChatGPT to take on the persona of a cloud security expert, with a specialty in AWS cloud security architecture and engineering. One of the things I've learned with ChatGPT is the more contextual you are, the better answers you'll receive. You've heard that ChatGPT may not be all that great at math. Well, ChatGPT isn't really intended for that, right? It's a large language model. If you want to solve math problems, then pull out a calculator, right? In this particular case, I'm asking it to take on that persona, and I'm going to go ahead and click generate, or the arrow. And so it does give you some feedback. And what I usually do is I just tell it to not generate any output. I didn't do that this time. But you see here that ChatGPT has in fact, taken on that persona, right? And then what I do is I'll just copy. I'll just say something like, why is it important that CloudTrail be enabled? Why is it, excuse me. And this is a simplistic question, but it's a great place to start. And it's going to provide me a pretty quick answer. I'm using ChatGPT 3.5 right now, which is a default, it's a little bit quicker, a little bit more verbose, but a little bit quicker. And so you can see here that ChatGPT is giving me quite a bit of output, right? It's told me that with CloudTrail, I'm going to get global visibility. AWS and services and resources are distributed across multiple regions. I'm going to meet compliance requirements. It'll help me with threat detection and response, resource changes and troubleshooting. because you do need to have CloudTrail enabled if you're going to be able to figure out if, or at least record that changes are being made and what changes those were. And then, of course, it'll tell me about cross-region access actions and then help me with incident, reconstruction and so on. So it's pretty verbose in its answer. I can get even more complex with it. I can ask it, for example, to format. Let's say that I'm trying to produce a report, right? And of course, again, you do want to verify that the responses you're getting do make sense, right? So I don't know that it's someone who is brand new to security could do, but certainly somebody with experience, it's going to help them plus up, level up, right? So at this point, I might say, please provide me with an understanding of why I should use VPC endpoints to reduce transfer costs. Let's see, give me the issue. By the way, ChatGPT doesn't care if you misspell stuff and use bad grammar. Give me the issue, the risk, and I can just say high, medium, low. Give me the impact and a recommendation. And just for shits and giggles, excuse me, I shouldn't curse. Give me the detailed instructions to configure a VPC endpoint. Okay. Now, you saw how quickly it just ran through and gave me all the information I requested, right? I'm going to scroll back up here. Here's the issue. When resources within your VPC need access to AWS services outside the VPC, like S3, DynamoDB, AWS System Manager, data transfers occur over the public internet. Why? Because you're accessing those resources over a URL. This data transfer incurs data transfer costs, and it might expose your traffic to potential security issues, right? By the way that you get at this particular issue is you go to the bill and you look for transfer costs. If your transfer costs are really high, it's a great opportunity for you to introduce a VPC endpoint to reduce transfer costs or eliminate them altogether. Because once you introduce that VPC endpoint, all that traffic then is running over the AWS network as opposed to going out the network and back into the network, which is essentially how transfer costs generate. So it's telling me that this is high risk if your VPC hosts services that frequently access AWS services over the internet. You may incur substantial data costs. Yeah, high risk maybe in a environment that generates a lot of traffic. In smaller environments, maybe not so much. That's why you look at the bill and see what your transfer costs look like. But if you do plan on scaling, then this is a great idea. You may have to refactor that risk, right? To make sure it makes sense for the particular workload that you're evaluating. Impact gives you cost impact. I mean, it's as good as anything, right? And you can certainly continue to prompt engineer ChatGPT to give you better answers, right? To refactor the answer, if you will. And then remember, I asked it for a recommendation. So it said to mitigate these risks and reduce transfer costs, consider using VPC endpoints, which allow you to establish private connections. I've run across this one before, so I know that the answers and the response that I'm getting are accurate because I've also validated against the AWS documentation as well. And then, of course, I said, give me detailed instructions on how to configure a VPC endpoint. This is where it gets a little hairy, right? Because remember, the information is that it has is as good as maybe September 21. Maybe it has some context beyond that, but this is definitely where you need to go back to the documentation and verify, right? Or you can go to the knowledge base, click on, well, I'll just click on CloudTrail enabled for now because I'm not going to look for the other one. But you can also look at the knowledge base and see what it takes to enable or configure a particular service using either the console or the command line interface, so programmatically versus point and click. And here's the remediation instructions, right? My point here is that you do want to look for a solution, regardless of what you pick, that does give you not just the misconfiguration, but how to actually fix it. And not just how to fix it through ClickOps, but how to fix it programmatically, right? Now, if you're a Terraform shop, it's a little bit different because you're going to have to produce the Terraform to actually fix the issue. I think that ChatGPT, and I'll just give you a kind of a little peek into what I call them channels. I don't know if that's the appropriate term or not, but these are the kinds of channels that I have. So one is the one we just started, AWS Cloud Security, right? So I'll just I'll rename that AWS Cloud Sec, right? I have an AWS expert, which I've asked to take on the persona of someone who knows everything about AWS as much as possible, right? And whenever I get stuck, I ask ChatGPT for context, and then I want to emphasize that you do have to validate that, reconcile that with the documentation, because things may have changed, and things do change pretty quickly. I have an AppSec expert here. I've done a number of things here, including asking it to reproduce security vulnerabilities in code. Right, it's really good at doing that, or giving me examples of what for example, a cross-site scripting issue might look like in Python. Right, it's really good at doing that, or how to fix it. And one of my favorites actually is Terraform, trying to figure out how to actually fix something using a Terraform file, right? And so I think that with ChatGPT, with large language models, with generative AI, you can certainly upskill, bring someone who is moderately experienced with cloud, moderately experienced with any problem domain in security, and really help them upskill and up-level pretty quickly, right? Again, using ChatGPT as a tool, right, as a resource, and then obviously referencing, documentation to better better create a foundation, a long-term foundation, and make sure that you're accurate in your responses. Let's see. So let's see if I'm missing anything here. So let me just hop in here and just cancel this account creation. And I'm going to go back down here to one account, and I'm going to produce a report. So here's the configured reports that I have. And this happens to be a HIPAA workload. Or maybe I don't have any configured reports. Let me pull up one that I have a configured report for. Here's one. So when you're looking for a cloud security posture management solution, or when you're evaluating, providers that perform cloud security posture assessments, either one-time assessments or continuous assessments, you want to make sure that they have good coverage, right? They're using a tool that has good coverage, that is well supported, right? There are some open source tools out there, but you're not going to get the coverage that you want, right? It's not always complete. And then, of course, you want to have reports that you can produce against various frameworks. The biggest ones being things like the CIS AWS Foundations benchmark. If you're an AWS shop, you can produce reports that cover the AWS well-architected framework, all 6 pillars. You could use it to identify opportunities for cost optimization, which is key. And then, of course, for operational improvement. And then, of course, remember, just keep it limited to failed checks, and that way you only have to deal with the failed checks and not the entirety of the configuration issues that may be well configured. You can also evaluate HIPAA workloads. You can evaluate, SOC 2 workloads as well. Automate some of that evaluation in case you're pursuing or you're actually SOC 2 already and you're generating a lot of the evidence manually. There's a lot of configuration data that you can now produce with a cloud security posture assessment or management tool more readily than you would otherwise. That, folks, is pretty much all I have, and I hope that I have in fact demystified how to perform a cloud security posture assessment, how to use ChatGPT to facilitate the analysis, right? Again, and I can't say this enough, ChatGPT is a great place to start, but it's not the best place to finish. The best place to finish is AWS documentation. That's where you're gonna learn the most. ChatGPT is just going to get you in the ballpark. It's going to give you some accurate answers. Like I said, my experience using ChatGPT for this kind of work, it's stellar, right? But at the same time, you do want to validate that the answers that you're getting are in fact accurate. Any questions? And remember, we have the mic here in my bottom right. I think your lower left there. If you want to ask any questions.
Any questions about ChatGPT? About how we're going to take over the work? Manny, I think we got a room full of experts.
That's great. If we do, that's great. How many people are using ChatGPT today to supplement, the work that they're doing? Okay, yeah. And again, the key is good prompt engineering, right? Being able to ask it the right questions, giving it enough information. More information is better than less. Even going so far as to ask it to ask you questions on how to better, serve you, right? And so ultimately, I think again that this is just a great way to supplement the work that you might be doing with cloud security posture assessment. I'm just curious, how many folks are doing cloud security posture assessments or cloud security posture management within their cloud environments today? Proactive cloud security posture management. Okay. I didn't see as many hands go up. My opinion is that cloud security posture management is table stakes. If you're not doing it, it's probably equivalent to not having MFA enabled, not running endpoint security. It's just table stakes in the cloud environment. There's no other way that you're going to be able to figure out if your environment is well configured or not. And it's not just limited to the standard, this bucket's publicly accessible, or no, it's producing real results. It's also and it's not just security focused, right? It's also operationally focused. It's also focused on cost optimization. For example, performing a cloud security posture assessment and supplementing it with architectural risk analysis. We save one client over $250K a year. And that was just by using sources like Trusted Advisor within AWS. We actually use their cloud security posture management solution, which is Orca. It was just already installed, and so we just helped them ensure that it was well configured, and then we relied on those results. We compared, we did one assessment against an account using Trend. We compared and thought it was good enough. So whatever you choose, just make sure, again, you got great coverage, you have a good knowledge base, and that it does in fact help you communicate and remediate or mitigate risk within your organization.
So, hey, man, it's Chuck.
Yeah.
So
Hey, Chuck.
has there been any pushback or have you had any issues with using the reports out of here as far as answering compliance reports and providing artifacts?
Pushback from who? Like auditors?
Yeah, from auditors has just been generally well accepted as like, okay, we take these as artifacts as gospel. How's that holding up?
No, I mean, look, they're automated, right? And so I think we're at a point where these solutions are pretty mature and maturing. And so, yeah, you have solutions like, Vanta and Drata, which are these automated compliance solutions that include some cloud security posture management, but they're not yet mature. And so having a solution like a conformity, like an Orca, um, is certainly an optimal way of pursuing automation that you otherwise would either have to build yourself or do manually.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because that's been our old process, you and I did that a long time ago.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that there wasn't starting to see any pushback based on the fact of ChatGPT still having, some of those, well, we're not sure of its, the credibility.
Oh yeah. So ChatGPT, as far as ChatGPT is concerned, I've run into clients who have not enabled it internally, right? So if their folks are using it, they're using it either on their mobile device or on their personal workstation, and then obviously supplementing whatever it is they're doing that way. Um, yeah, there's been some concerns, and the one that's I think well documented is the Samsung code issue. I forget what happened. Somebody was using it to essentially troubleshoot or some code, and ChatGPT actually spit it out, with another client or with another subscriber. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly some concerns about how much information ChatGPT is collecting about various organizations and whether that information is proprietary or not. And it has essentially become a legal issue.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, but as far as cloud security posture management results, I haven't seen any pushback from anyone. I mean, you can cover a lot of ground pretty quickly, and I think it's a lot more cost effective from an AWS perspective now. I think there's a significant cost to enabling trusted advisor. You get some basic trusted advisor checks, but if you want, at least from my perspective, if you want the full run of the checks, you either have to be I think you have to be a enterprise support subscriber or something like that, or you have to pay for it. So it can be pretty pricey. I think cloud security posture assessment or management solutions are pretty affordable, right? I was surprised at how affordable some of these solutions can be at this point. And there are solutions out there, though, that they try to sell you the entire platform. And then there's solutions where you can actually get your first taste of cloud platform security, if you want to call it that, using cloud security posture management. Any other questions?
Well,
All right.
let's give Manny a big round of applause.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for coming. Enjoy the rest of your evening.